Shape by Edward Tennyson. So grab your coffee, sit back, and enjoy the show. Diane stood on her back porch, looking out over her land and towards the distant mountains. The early morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, a giant yellow orb creating deep shadows on the warming land below. Gus, her ancient border collie, sat at her feet looking expectantly at her. She glanced from him to the barn and thought, the horses need to be let out. But that could wait a little longer. Taking a sip of her coffee, she pondered the upcoming day. She kneeled and placed the cup beside her foot. Gus sniffed the coffee and then licked her hand. She scratched his belly, and he rolled over to give her better access. Had it really been almost a year since that wintry night her husband had died in a tragic car accident? She'd known when it happened, something she could not explain, then or now. But that night she'd just known he was gone. She found the wreck of his car only 2 miles away. But it had been too late. From that day onward, she'd had to learn how to run the ranch on her own, how to be out here alone. They'd never had children, although they'd always meant to. Later, she pushed the memory away like a sudden chill. Time, she thought, is the one thing you can never get back once it's past. She again took up her coffee and looked out over her fields. Past the wheat in the far distance, she could see her neighbor's house. The Sullivans lived there with their daughter, Maggie. How old was she? 10? No, 11. She sighed again. Diane finished the cup and went inside to change into her work clothes. With a glass of water, she fished out her happy pills and swallowed them down. She imagined feeling them take away some of the pain, the darkness that was right there, waiting, always waiting to take her. The scars across her wrists, faint now, almost gone. She shook her head, clearing her thoughts. It had always been their dream to own a farm, and so they'd saved their money and bought this small ranch and stables. The horses boarded here were not her own, but she treated them as if they were her children. Children, she thought, and pushed back tears. Even a year later, the tears came. She banged her fist on the counter, suddenly angry at herself, then went to get dressed. She had 6 horses stabled here. That generated enough income for the mortgage and then some. Not something that would ever make them rich, but he'd been successful in his former life and they had a good amount saved, even after buying the ranch. What they'd really bought was solitude. After all those years in the city, they'd wanted it, craved it. But in the end, solitude without him was just isolation, and she felt the loneliness, like a lingering darkness on the edge of her vision. Pulling on her boots, she went outside and started the morning. By noon, she had finished cleaning out the stalls and the horses were loose and wandering the paddock. She watched them for a few moments and then noticed the sky was turning darker. Enormous storm clouds, black and angry, floated over the ridge of the mountains, headed towards her. She decided to stop for lunch and check the weather. In the kitchen, she watched Gus run in and out of the paddock. The horses were eyeing him with suspicion when the rumbling of distant thunder reached them. The horses' ears swiveled like radar dishes, searching for a signal, and their heads bobbed up and down. She turned on her television and found a local channel. She was waiting for a storm update when she heard Gus barking. Diane moved to the window and saw him by the barn. The wind had picked up and the barn door had blown open. "Damn that latch," she muttered as she headed towards the door. In the short time she was inside, the temperature had dropped and the skies had grown even darker. She'd have to put the horses in if it got worse. She forced the barn doors closed and found a hammer and nailed the latch back into place, knowing that it would only hold so long before she had to really fix it. Back inside, she caught the last few words of a news broadcast. A photo of a man with dark hair, deep shadows under his eyes, and a scraggly mustache dressed in an orange jumpsuit was on the screen while the news anchor spoke. Escaped while he was in the courthouse awaiting a hearing for the suspected slaying of 2 children. Local authorities have issued an alert. Checkpoints have been set up. If you see this man, do not approach. Lock your doors and call 911 or your local police. Great, she thought. Storm escaped nutjob, how much worse can it get? She shook her head and turned off the screen. Diane had just finished stabling the last horse when the first drops of rain fell. Gus trotted next to her as she barred the barn's main doors and went out the side door, careful to latch that too. They ran for the house. Though the farm was old, the house was modern, and once she and Gus were back inside, the storm was little more than a distraction. She made some more tea and curled up on the couch with a book, intending to finally finish it and move to the next in the series. By 9 that evening, the storm was in full force. Winds howled and blew. Gus got off the couch and padded into the kitchen where he began barking. Has the barn come open again? She wondered. What's going on, Gus? You see something? She asked, patting the dog. Outside it was dark except for the floodlight near the barn. She looked out and all the doors were closed. Just then the lights flickered twice and then went out completely. An inky black darkness engulfed her. Gus started barking again. She shushed him and then groped for the flashlight. Gus let out a low growl, and she stopped and looked out towards the barn. The flashes of lightning were bright enough to see details in the old weathered wood. For some reason, the news broadcast came back to her, but she shook it off as nerves. Aha, she said, switching on the flashlight. The beam was bright enough to light the kitchen and part of the main room. Why hadn't the generator come on, she wondered. Armed with her rain poncho, rain boots, and flashlight, she opened the back door to check it out. Gus bolted past her and disappeared into the night. Damn, she muttered. Diane pulled the hood closer and stepped out into the storm. The wind-driven rain pelted her face, making it hard to see. The generator shed was just on the other side of the barn, and she half walked and half stumbled through the rain towards it. As she neared, she found the door to the shed open. It was a heavy door, and even ajar, the wind barely moved it. After shining the light inside, she closed the door behind her. She examined the generator and found the fuel switch was in the off position. She moved it to on and pressed the ignition switch. Gus parked fiercely in the distance, just before the electric starter ground, and the generator came to life. The noise was deafening in the small room. She went back outside and was relieved to see the lights of the house and barn were on now. She could also see the barn door was open. I closed that, she thought, and then wondered if Gus had somehow opened it. As she walked closer, she realized she didn't hear him barking anymore. She went inside and looked around. Gus, she called. The horses were in their stalls. One of them nickered a greeting. She walked over and caressed his face. He shook his head. Most of the stalls were in deep shadow since the emergency lights didn't power the main barn lights. As she walked towards the back of the stalls, she heard rustling. Come here, Gus, she commanded, but Gus did not come. She narrowed her eyes and stalked towards the back with the flashlight held overhead like a baton. A figure detached from the deeper shadows and leaped at her. She screamed until she felt Gus's wet tongue on her face. She laughed and then pushed him off. Get in the house, she said, and Gus obediently left the barn. She took another quick look around and went back outside, closing the door firmly behind her. She thought she saw Gus's shadow in the kitchen window, watching her make her way back to the house. When she stepped back inside, she was soaked to the bone. Even her poncho hadn't been enough to keep the horizontal rain from getting to her. Although she'd left the back door ajar, she didn't see Gus in the kitchen. Deciding against tracking through the house in her wet clothes, she stripped them off and hung them by the door, hoping they'd at least drip dry some by morning. Wearing only her long underwear, she rounded the corner of the main room when powerful arms suddenly grabbed her. She screamed and struggled, but to no avail. Doubling her efforts, she kicked and bucked and finally broke free. Then she felt a sudden sharp pain in her head, and everything went black. She woke some time later, disoriented until she realized she was on the couch and a blanket had been thrown over her. She tried to move, then realized in horror she was bound and her mouth taped. Her head ached, a dull, steady throb. Had someone hit her? She remembered getting loose, and then pain. Everything came back to her in a flash, and she frantically looked around the room. She tried to scream, but only managed to make a soft whimpering sound. She forced herself to stop, realizing the nearest house was too far away for anyone to hear her on a clear day, much less in this storm. Fear gripped her as she wept and struggled against her bonds. She heard footsteps approach from behind, and she froze. The sound came closer, and then a man spoke. Good. You're awake. She tried to lift herself, but she could not get the angle to see behind the couch. Don't worry, the man continued. My daddy was a rancher. He taught me how to truss hogs. You won't get loose." She swallowed down her terror and tried to move again, but a sudden sharp pain in the back of her head stopped her. She whimpered. The dirty face of the man suddenly appeared over the back of the couch. She yelped. He looked familiar, dark hair, sullen eyes, and mustache. "How's your head?" he asked. Sudden anger filled her, and she glared at him and mumbled something incoherent. Who was this man? How dare he come into her home? He shook his head and walked around to the front of the couch. He was wearing a shirt she recognized. It belonged to her late husband. Her eyes opened wide in recognition, then fear, then loathing. "Hey, don't blame me. You whacked yourself good on the mantel back there," he said, tapping his head. "I was nice enough to cover you and put a bandage on." "Fuck you," she mumbled through the tape. He chuckled. "I understood that." He sat down in the chair opposite her and didn't say anything, just stared at her. Lightning lit the room and something flashed in his eyes. She studied him. Up close, he wasn't sinister. He looked like a homeless man. A little desperate, but someone who had seen a hard life. She took a chance. She tried to sit up. He leaned forward and helped her into a sitting position and then, to her surprise, propped a pillow behind her back. She recognized him then, when he leaned over and she saw his face close up. Terror threatened to grip her, but she fought it back. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. She nodded, not taking her eyes off of him. "I'm going to remove the tape if you promise not to scream, okay?" She nodded. He moved closer, smelling of dirt and something else she couldn't identify. She jerked away. "I'm just going to pull the tape off, but it's going to hurt. You understand?" She nodded and slowly leaned closer. He worked the end of the tape until he got hold of the edge. "Okay," he said, "on the count of 5. She nodded, taking several deep breaths. 1. Deep breath. 2. Deep breath. With a sudden movement, he ripped the tape from her mouth. The blinding bright pain of its removal left her breathless. With her face burning, she choked in huge gulps of air. He sat down again, an amused look on his face. "What happened to 5? She said between gulps. "It would have hurt more. Better to just get it over with, my daddy used to say." She had to get away from him, get to the phone, or, she suddenly remembered, the axe by the back door. Could I make it? She wondered. "What's your name?" he asked. After a moment, she told him. "Diane." "Well, I'm Jack," the man said, then chuckled. She looked at him, confused. "Just like the song Jack and Diane." Lightning flashed, and again she saw a strange look in his eyes as he turned towards the windows. What was that? Fear? Surely a man like this was not afraid of a storm. "Let me go. I won't tell anyone you were here," she said. He looked back at her as if seeing her for the first time and suddenly moved closer. Face to face, he gritted his teeth, staring her down. But then, just as suddenly, he looked away, saying, "Not yet. I have money. A truck even," Diane pleaded. He rubbed his face and walked off, leaving her sitting on the couch trussed up like a pig. Sometime later, she heard him walking and from the clock over the fireplace. She saw it was close to midnight. She'd been tied up for almost 3 hours. "I have to go," she called loudly. He walked back into the room so she could see him, shook his head no. "I have to go to the bathroom," she clarified. He narrowed his eyes, then walked towards her. She screamed and struggled. "Stop fighting," he yelled. "I'm taking you to the toilet." For such a slim man, he was extremely strong. He lifted her up from the couch without even a grunt and walked with her to the bathroom, lifted the lid of the toilet with his boot, pushed her long johns down, and then sat her down. "My hands?" she said, motioning at her bindings. He leaned over her and loosened the ropes and stood up. She glared at him. "I'd like some privacy." He rolled his eyes and stepped just outside the doorway. When she finished, she leaned forward and looked out into the hall, but could not see him. She heard him breathing, though, knew he was there. Keeping an eye on the door, she reached over and carefully pulled open a drawer and felt around inside. She trapped a small pair of cuticle scissors between her fingers and sat back down just as he asked from outside, "Are you done?" She pushed the scissors up between her bound wrists and struggled with her bottoms but only managed to cover her legs. "I can't get my pants up," she said in reply. He stepped in and she tried to turn away from him. "Don't worry, I won't peek." He pulled up her pants, then picked her up again just as effortlessly and carried her back to the couch. Lightning flashed again, and this time she was certain she saw fear in his eyes. "The lightning scares you?" It came out as an accusation. He looked at her for a moment as if debating, then shook his head and said, "It's not the lightning." She didn't reply, just looked at him. He didn't turn around but said, "They're out there." "Who's out there?" she asked. "They look like children but are not." A sudden pang of terror gripped her as she remembered why he'd been in jail. Did he really kill 2 children? He's insane, she thought. He started speaking again, but it wasn't to her, and it came out in a hoarse whisper. "My daddy told me when I was young, only special people can see their true shape. He said you have to see their shadows. Lightning is your friend," he said. The lightning flashed again. Then he was silent and said no more. Unable to hold it in, she turned her face into the couch and sobbed in terror, thinking of the children he'd killed. Eventually, exhaustion took her and she fell asleep. When she woke, she saw him still looking out into the darkness. "I'm hungry and cold," she said in almost a whisper, pushing herself up into a sitting position. The man walked into the kitchen and she heard him moving things around. A few minutes later, he returned with a sandwich and a coffee mug of water. He set them next to her and then found a blanket for her. He sat across from her and watched her eat for a moment, then closed his eyes. When she finished eating, she waited, watched his breathing grow steady and deep. He was asleep. She shifted on the couch to see if he was faking, but he didn't stir. With her arms under the blankets, she slowly worked the scissors out from between her bonds and tried to get them into place. But her hands were numb from being bound so long. She had to struggle to free them. She gasped when they slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. Holding her breath, she waited to see if he woke before moving again. But he did not move. She shifted on the couch until her feet were out from under the blankets and used her toes to pull them closer to her, and then she reversed direction and finally managed to get her hands on them. He stirred. She froze again. After an eternity, she heard him snore softly and began cutting the rope that held her. She had cut through the last of the thread and started rubbing her wrists under the blankets when he woke. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Nothing, just getting comfortable." He stood up and walked over to her, reaching for her blankets. When he was inches away, she screamed out her pent-up fury and jumped at him. Her numb legs propelled her from the couch in an awkward catapult. He jumped back and she fell on top of him. She brought the scissors down and stabbed him in the neck and shoulder. Blood gushed. Diane screamed and stabbed him again. With a grunt, he threw her off of him and rolled away, got to his feet. She launched herself at him again, and he repelled her with such force that she bounced over the back of the couch and lost hold of the scissors when she fell behind it, landing hard on the floor. Struggling, she rose to her feet, urging her numb limbs to respond. She half-crawled, half-dragged into the kitchen, headed for the axe by the door. From behind her, he roared, and she heard the couch slam against the wall. She forgot the axe when she saw him round the corner. Blood covered the front of his shirt. His face was a mask of determination, more frightening than the rage she'd expected. She pulled herself up by the coat rack, then pushed it down and swept the shelves onto the floor, opening the door and fleeing into the night. She pushed herself to her limits and ran as fast as she ever had. She didn't know how far behind he was and didn't dare look. Running swiftly, she made her way to the back of the barn and then ventured into the wheat field. "The Sullivans," she repeated over and over, their name a mantra driving her through the pain and cold. Every time lightning crackled, she ducked down and only moved again when she heard the thunder. She couldn't remember a storm like this in years. Maybe never. She heard him somewhere behind, yelling her name. She did not stop. After a long while, she crossed the field and the sound of his voice grew distant. The lightning flashed again and she could see the Sullivans' farmhouse, closer now. Convinced she'd lost him, she crept even closer. Their large combine sat quietly in the rain like a slumbering giant. No lights were on inside. She shivered uncontrollably and her teeth chattered as she looked around. A flash of movement caught her attention, and she turned just as a body slammed into her. She fell and tried to roll away. She put her arms up and felt fur. "Gus!" The dog wagged his tail and Play bowed. She grabbed him and hugged him tightly until he squirmed and she let go. Then she started crying and hugged him again. The warmth of his body against her bare skin cut the cold. She stood, picked him up and held him against her, trying to suck every bit of warmth from him as he licked her face. Diane cautiously crept towards the house, keeping a wary eye behind her, alert to any movement. She reached the front porch and extended a hand to bang on the door. "What are you doing?" a little girl's voice asked. Diane yelped and jumped back to see Maggie in an open window next to the door. Gus growled and struggled in her arms. She hushed him. "Maggie, remember me? Diane?" Maggie nodded and then asked, "Why are you in your underwear?" The sudden awkwardness of the question made her laugh, then cry. The front door opened and Maggie stood there. Diane walked into the house, still shivering from the cold. "The power is out," Maggie said. Maggie, can you get your parents for me?" Maggie shook her head. "They're not home." She thought that odd, but she was too cold and tired to say anything. She spotted a long coat hanging on the wall and put Gus down. He let out a low growl and scurried away from her. "Stop it," she said to him. The coat was huge and hung past her knees, but its wonderful warmth was all she cared about. Diane gathered her thoughts. She turned and locked the door behind her and put her hands on Maggie's slim shoulders. She wanted to explain what happened, but only managed to say, "Maggie, I need to use your phone. May I?" Maggie nodded and pointed toward the back to the kitchen. Diane felt her way through the house, moving slowly. As she neared the kitchen, she smelled something foul. What was it? Had the food gone bad? Was it feces? Moving ahead, she unknowingly stepped on a squishy and damp object. She jumped back, wondering if she had just stepped in what she smelled. When she tried a different route, she accidentally bumped into something else that was soft and yielding. She reached down and felt at her feet. She fell back when she realized it was a person. "Oh my God," she said aloud. She continued feeling around until she realized it was the body of a child. "Another child?" she thought in confusion. "Are you okay?" she said aloud. She felt something warm and wet and quickly pulled her hand back. It was slick and sticky. She brought her hand up to her face just as lightning flashed and illuminated the child sprawled before her. In that brief flash, Maggie's lifeless face stared up at her. Diane screamed and looked behind her as a second bolt of lightning split the night sky, and she saw the silhouette of the child she had thought was Maggie framed against the window. A red halo surrounded her and outlined her form. From her body sprouted the shadow of horrible bat-like wings. The Maggie creature hissed and came towards her. Frozen in horror, all she could do was watch as the thing that was not Maggie approached. Gus leaped onto the creature and they both rolled into the darkness. She heard Gus growl and bark, and then he let out a yelp. His shadow flew into the air and crashed against the wall. She ran. She tripped over Maggie's body and fell onto a table. The breath rushed out of her as she fell over, gasping for breath. The creature was upon her in an instant. Claw-like fingers closed around her throat. No matter how hard she tried to crawl and buck, the creature remained attached to her back. She felt sharp talons dig into her flesh as she screamed. She heard a crashing sound from the door behind them. Jack screamed her name. There was a sudden impact and then the creature was gone. Lightning flashed and she saw it lying on its side, an axe buried in its neck. It writhed, still trying to reach her in its death throes. Strong arms picked her up from the floor. She clung to him and watched the creature die. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't save them," she heard him whisper, and at that moment, lightning flashed again. She didn't see the winged shape of his shadow. Epilogue. The full moon rose high in the sky. Diane sat cross-legged in meditation. "I can feel another one, Jack," she said. Behind her, a man laying in the truck's bed stirred and sat up. He sniffed the air. "Yep, storm's coming too," he said. Diane whistled, and Gus's answering bark echoed in the distance. She stretched and stood up. The leather of her boots creaked as she pulled them on. She removed a pair of dark leather gloves and stretched them on tight, making a fist. Looking up at the moon, she gave a silent prayer while touching the Navajo talisman around her neck, then picked up a pair of machetes from the seat and strapped one on her belt and the other across her back. "Time to gear up," she said. Hey family. A very big thank you to Edward Tennyson for allowing me to narrate such an awesome tale. Be sure to check out their Reddit profile for more of their awesome works. If you would like to support us and make a donation, I'd be very much appreciative. I do have PayPal and a Buy Me a Coffee account. Be sure to also check out our merch store. There are plenty of items and designs to choose from. If you enjoyed this video, then why not check out the next one, here, on the right-hand side. You can also follow us. All my socials and all my other links are contained within the Linktree link below. Take care, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful and peaceful night. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.